I think it's pretty safe to say, if you look at my recent uploads lately, that I'm a little bit into these retro-inspired but new games. Another one on that list that I haven't talked about yet is Tunic. If you haven't heard about it yet, it's definitely inspired by the old Zelda games with a lot more modern influence games. Similar to like what I would usually compare it to is if you fuse together Link to the Past and some Souls-like elements. It also definitely seems to heavily take inspiration from one of the most recent Zelda games, being a remake of an older Zelda game, the new Link's Awakening. Art style is incredibly similar, and honestly the gameplay is incredibly similar too. But as somebody that's a huge fan of the entire Zelda franchise, this is a nice bit of nostalgia, if you will, but I was also glad to see that it took inspiration from other things to make it more interesting than just a Zelda ripoff. So I figured we'd take the time to go into this a little bit more in depth and kind of take apart exactly what makes this game good, and hopefully to help you out to see if this is something that you should try out as well. So let's first talk about its inspirations. So again, like I've said a couple times now, this is very similar to older Zelda games, in the way that you're viewing from a sort of top-down angle on a main character wearing a green outfit, using a sword and shield, and other various items they find around the world to be able to use to progress through that world. Then the other side of things where it takes a lot of inspiration from is really the Souls-like games, based around that same loop of progression where you have currency that you save up, and when you die, you lose all of that. You can return back and retrieve that resource again if you die, and can return to that same place without dying again, and then you then spend that currency to level up your character. It also has the same bonfire, if you will, mechanic, where your progression is really only saved from the last time that you visited a bonfire. In this game, it's a shrine instead. And largely, those are the two biggest things that I see a lot of influences from, is both of those types of games together. And honestly, it works together really well, more than I even anticipated when I first heard about it. It honestly takes the stakes of a Zelda game and raises them a lot higher, just knowing that you're going to have to retrack through all the progress you've had so far. It also forces you to really focus on how to learn an attack pattern of a certain enemy to make sure that you can overcome it and not be stuck in a certain area. While I don't think Tunic is the hardest game in the world, it did have me stuck on a couple combat encounters that took me a little bit to kind of get through. But now I want to go into what makes this game more unique. I think my favorite mechanic overall for the entire game is the fact that you have an instruction manual that you're building as you're playing the game all the way through. So what that means is you'll find some pages isolated in the world. When you pick them up, you can read them and it'll give you some tips and pointers on how to actually play the game. For instance, one of the first pages you pick up lets you know how to roll. It also lets you know that whenever you do roll, it shows you where you have your iframes, so you can know when you're going to take damage and when you're not. It also intentionally leaves a lot of mysteries, showing just little tidbits of information you might get later on, but not explaining it, or showing it in a language that, isn't an actual real language. It just looks like runes. But what I love about this is there's a lot of different features you have access to at the very beginning that you could potentially guess on how to actually access them, but a lot of times you're not going to figure it out until you find the instruction manual. It's going to tell you how to do it. Or, I guess you could probably look it up. I don't really recommend this, but hey, I'm not your dad. You play it how you want. It honestly makes it to where your level of excitement raises so much higher whenever you do find one of these pages. Unlocking another secret and a mystery of the world. It could be a map of a dungeon you're going to go to later. It can show you where hidden items are, or again, reveal to you a hidden gameplay feature that you technically had access to from the beginning of the game you just didn't know about. And I really do think that if this sounds frustrating to you, honestly, give it a shot, because it's, in my opinion, I didn't find it frustrating. I don't know, it didn't really feel like gatekeeping to me, if that makes sense. What I love about this overall, it's another touch of how the game likes to do its storytelling. As far as I can recall, and I beat this game a little while ago, the only real actual text that you get that's in English or whatever native language you put the game in is really only in the instruction manual and on, of course, the title screen. Everything else is told to you in an environmental format, that being your objectives, your goals, what's happening in certain areas. And I just appreciate that, even though they don't explicitly spell things out to you and there's no voice acting in the game either, you still know where to go. It still does a very good job of directing you where you need to go, letting you see everything that's interesting in the setting, and being able to glean information from said setting. And honestly, I find that kind of difficult, thinking about having to put together a story with no dialogue, and still having it be coherent, and also not having your players constantly get lost. Speaking of that, I also really appreciate that it does heavily inspire all that is good from the Zelda franchise. So it does have a lot of different unlockables that are fun for you to be able to return back to an area, to maybe move forward or traverse where you couldn't before. Say you got a grappling hook and you remember the little post that you were able to grappling hook on earlier, but you didn't have the item, but now you do, and you can go back. And it also does take a lot of the influences of the puzzles from Zelda games. And I found them to be the right amount of challenging, at least for the way that I like to play my games like this. I wasn't stumped for super long. I honestly never had to like turn the game off and go like think about it for a while or anything. I could just kind of keep playing through and eventually figure it out in the same session. And I never had to look anything up besides one puzzle that I think is impossible to solve. I don't know. It could just be me, but even when I finally caved in and looked it up, there was one puzzle in the game near the end of the game that I don't know how you would have figured it out without looking it up. But again, no spoilers in this video, and that also is just an optional unlock to get the true ending of the game. But staying on the positive side of things, I really do enjoy when a game will throw you a puzzle that lets you think for a little while but doesn't stump you completely to where you have to go look it up. And really, like I said, I thought this game was perfect with that, where, you know, the difficulty of the game overall, I felt like it was exactly what I wanted it to be. It was difficult to the point where, say, in combat, I was still dying and had to relearn like different patterns of attacks for different enemies. And also with puzzles, I'd be stumped for a little while, but I'd still be able to reasonably figure it out, and I really enjoy that a lot. To be honest, I feel like there's not really a whole lot to really express with this game, but it does have a lot of charm, being in its art, its music, and just its storytelling and everything that's wrapped up that we've talked about before. Even though, in my opinion, it's a simplistic game in nature, it just does what it's trying to do very effectively. I didn't feel like this game really dragged or had sections that I wasn't a huge fan of. I felt as though it was very concise, all of the areas you explored were very intentional, and honestly the game was just fun. It felt like a good nostalgia trip for me to be able to go back to something that I was comfortable with, as I've enjoyed Zelda games for my entire life. But it was cool to also see modern influences from other games to be able to draw inspiration from and be able to make something a little bit more of a unique experience. I really do think that if you heard something that was appealing to you in this video, you pretty much know what you're getting into now. You don't really need a whole lot more information than this, and I'd really rather not dive into spoilers or any sort of spoiler territory at all. If you like these types of Zelda games, or if you haven't played one but you really want to, this is a really good one to pick up and play. The nice thing is it's relatively cheap, and it's also on Game Pass. That's how I ended up playing it. Although I will say if you're on PC, just go in expecting you're gonna have to change the keybinds around if you are playing on mouse and keyboard, because yeah, those were bad. But once I got that all sorted out, I had a really good time with this game, and I really do think you will as well if, again, what you've heard here sounded appealing whatsoever. So I know this one is kind of short and sweet, but honestly that's kind of how the game is too, so I felt like it was good to just let you know exactly what made me excited about this game, but let you experience it yourself. So go ahead and let me know in the comments down below if it is something that you think you're going to pick up if you haven't yet, or if you've already played it, let me know what you thought about it below. But that's going to be it for me on this one, so I will see you all in the next one.